Boris Johnson takes a leaf from the presidential playbook. Labour demand PM apologises for Donald Trump-style photo op. After he delivers speech in front of a wall of police officers, Boris Johnson posed in front of a wall of trainee police officers in West Yorkshire. PM promised £750 million to fund a recruitment drive of 20,000 new officers, but the stunt was branded an abuse of power and unacceptable by Labour. Senior police figures also hit out at Move and told the PM he should apologise. The photo op was compared to Donald Trump's poses in front of the US military by Jack Maidment, deputy political editor for Mail Online and Chris Dyer, published 7:49 British Summer Time, the 6th of September 2019, updated 8:19 British Summer Time, the 6th of September 2019. Boris Johnson sparked a furious backlash after using a wall of police officers as the backdrop for a major speech yesterday as he was accused of abusing his power as Prime Minister. Mr. Johnson stood in front of the uniformed officers as he addressed the nation and demanded Jeremy Corbyn give him the early general election he has called for, but the decision to assemble such a large number of police for a televised speech has caused major controversy and prompted suggestions that the move was straight out of Donald Trump's playbook. Labour responded with fury to the use of the police for what the party claimed was a political stunt. Meanwhile, senior police figures said it was inappropriate and the wrong decision, amid growing calls for the PM to apologise. Mr. Johnson was also under fire after he arrived more than an hour late for the address in Yorkshire as the officers were made to wait for him. His speech was then momentarily interrupted as one of the officers standing behind him appeared to collapse. The speech was used by Mr. Johnson to promote the government's commitment to boost police numbers by 20,000, but he also used it to renew his attacks on Mr. Corbyn, who has frustrated the PM by refusing to back his call for an early general election to be held on October 15. John Apter, the national chairman of the Police Federation of England and Wales, led the criticism of the Premier as he said he was surprised that officers had been used for a political speech. Boris Johnson made a speech during a visit to West Yorkshire Police's training complex in Wakefield yesterday in front of a wall of new recruits. He told The Times, "I am sure that on reflection all concerned will agree that this was the wrong decision and it is disappointing that the focus has been taken away from the recruitment of 20,000 officers." There were approximately 35 new recruits stood behind Mr. Johnson at West Yorkshire Police's training complex in Wakefield. Attempt to send a tough law enforcement message inevitably drew comparisons with the political optics associated with Mr. Trump, who often poses in front of or alongside members of the US military. The political backlash to Mr. Johnson's speech was swift and furious. Yvette Cooper, Labour, the chairwoman of the Commons Home Affairs Committee and Yorkshire MP, said it was completely unacceptable for Number 10 to have drafted in the officers yesterday. "This is an abuse of power by Boris Johnson, making so many police stop the training and work to be part of his political stunt," she said. "They have a job to do here in West Yorks, and they train
and work hard for the whole community. Completely unacceptable to use them in this way." West Reading, Labour MP for Ilford North, echoed a similar sentiment as he said, "Every single one of these officers would be better placed policing our communities, not providing a Trump-style photo op." Boris Johnson should be arrested for wasting police time. The British Prime Minister's stunt was compared to Donald Trump's photo opportunities with the US military, above the US president at a visit to the USS Gerald Ford in Virginia in March. A police inspector, and author of Perverting the Course of Justice, tweeted, "2 months ago we were.
Now they're using us in an election campaign."
Straight out of the
Yesterday Mr. Trump again gave his backing to the British Premier, saying his friend knows how to double you in, just hours after he was humiliated in the House of Commons as MPs first backed a law to block a no-deal Brexit and then refused to support his early election plan. Mr. Johnson spoke in front of trainee officers as he answered questions on Brexit and his brother's shock resignation as a minister and MP. Trump speaking in front of tanks at the Joint Systems manufacturer in Lima, Ohio, in March. Mr. Trump told reporters in the Oval Office, "Boris is a friend of mine and he's going at it. There's no question about it. I watched him this morning. He's in there fighting and he knows how to win. Boris knows how to win." "Don't worry about him, he's going to be okay." In the last 24 hours, Mr. Johnson has tweeted 3 times criticizing Jeremy Corbyn for trying to block a no-deal Brexit. During Independence Day celebrations, Mr. Trump sparked controversy after he positioned tanks in central locations in Washington, D.C. Despite the 4th of July traditionally being non-partisan, Mr. Johnson was in Yorkshire yesterday to promote the government's pledge to give £750 million to fund a recruitment drive for an extra 20,000 police officers. During his speech, Mr. Johnson repeatedly criticized Mr. Corbyn for not backing his plans for a snap general election before he stopped talking when a female officer was unwell. The West Yorkshire Police and Crime Commissioner (PCC), Mark Burns-Williamson, called for Mr. Johnson to apologise. Mr. Burns-Williamson said, "To use police officers as the backdrop to what became a political speech was inappropriate and they shouldn't have been put in that position." During his speech, Mr. Johnson continued to criticize Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn for not backing his plans for a snap general election. Trump puts his hands on the shoulders of Army Black Knights running back Darnell Wolford before presenting the Commander-in-Chief's trophy to the U.S. Military Academy football team in May. It clearly turned into a rant about Brexit, the opposition, and a potential general election. "There's no way that police officers should have formed the backdrop to a speech of that nature." Asked if Mr. Johnson should apologize, he said, "Yes, because he's used the pretense of an announcement around police recruitment from mainly a political speech." Mr. Burns-Williamson said he had expressed his concerns to the Chief Constable at West Yorkshire Police and asked for an explanation about what happened. As he spoke, Mr. Johnson asked a female student police officer if she was okay after she appeared to become unwell as he was answering questions from journalists. Mr. Johnson had been speaking for about 20 minutes when the young woman Saturday down behind him. U.S. President Donald Trump and U.S. General John W. Raymond at a ceremony marking the establishment of the U.S. Space Command at the White House last week. Since becoming Prime Minister, Boris Johnson has received repeated words of support from the U.S. President. She was one of about 35 student officers who were standing in lines behind him. Providing a backdrop to his speech, the young woman officer appeared to hold her hat and then sit down as others around her looked concerned. Colleagues sitting in the audience in front of the Prime Minister drew his attention to her plight, prompting him to turn and ask her, "Are you all right?" As the officer Saturday with her head bowed, Mr. Johnson said, "I'm so sorry. Okay, that is a signal for me actively to wind up." Mr. Johnson had finished his speech and had answered a number of questions from journalists seated behind the officers in the audience. As he finished, all the police present stood up and Mr. Johnson went over to check on the stricken officer. She was then attended to by colleagues. "Let's block ads. Why?"